Bry's Comics.
In this video, we're going to talk about 6 tips to help make you a better collector. And I put in the thumbnail that you need to hear this. Whether you are a seasoned veteran, whether you're a comic book dealer and you've been doing this for 40 or 50 years, or whether this is your very first comic book related YouTube video and everything in between, there is valuable information in this video that you'll be glad you listened to. Before we get any further, I want to remind you we have a monthly giveaway here on the YouTube channel. If you subscribe to the channel, comment on this video, and like this video, you're entered to win a free slab. And if you head over to brycecomics.com and sign up for the newsletter, you're entered to win a free slab each and every month over there. It's also where you get first access to new collections, new inventory that comes through the shop, and mystery boxes, and a lot of exciting things over at brycecomics.com. Follow me on Instagram and Whatnot. Link in the description for $15 towards your first purchase on Whatnot. Tip number 1, we're going to jump right into it, is be patient. This world and everything in this world is telling you, hurry, hurry, rush, rush, go, go, go. YouTube right now is probably enticing you to click somewhere else on the screen to keep you engaged on their platform. Instagram is encouraging you to scroll, and they have dumped millions of dollars into how to make it irresistible to stop scrolling. I'm here to tell you to be patient. In this hobby, if you take an attitude of patience, if you base your whole collecting experience around being patient, in the long run, it will serve you well. Sure, there may be some instances where you miss out on something that you were maybe being a little bit too patient on. And we'll get back to that here in just a minute on when to be decisive and when not to be patient. But overall, if you take on an attitude of patience, in the long run, it will serve you well. There have been several times in my collecting experience, actually recently, where I didn't pull the trigger on a book that I wish I did. I didn't put enough research into it before the auction ended, and I may never have the chance to own those books again. But in the long run, in the grand scheme of things, my attitude of knowing this book will come back around, there will be other opportunities to buy this thing, that attitude has served me better than just jumping into things. So I want you to just take an attitude of patience in this hobby. Ask yourself, are you being rushed into something? Now, there is definitely nuance to this, and we'll get to that here more in just a second, because all of these tips kind of tie into each other. Like tip number 2, which is comics are not rare. And that is something that took me a while to learn in this hobby, is that comics are not rare. I mean, there are some exceptions to that. There's nuance to everything, and there's nuance to these tips as well. Some comics absolutely are rare, like Platinum Age, Golden Age comics, where there's, less than 100 copies on the census. By anyone's definition of rare, that is rare. But for the most part, for most of the books that you and I and people watching this video are collecting, we're talking about Silver Age, Bronze Age, Copper Age, Modern Age books. In almost all instances for those books, they are not rare. I'm not saying that they aren't valuable, okay? I'm just saying that they're not rare, which means that they will come up again. There will be other opportunities for the vast majority of comics that we collect in this hobby. Take, for example, Amazing Fantasy 15. By my definition, that book is not rare. Last I checked, there was over 2,500 copies on the CGC census, and that number's right here. That number, to me, is not rare. And granted, you have to recognize that a lot of these numbers are inflated. A lot of these numbers are ghost numbers on the CGC census, which means that they've been cracked out and pressed and resubmitted multiple times. So there's actually probably less of the graded copies on the CGC census that actually exist. But there's also a bunch of raw copies of Amazing Fantasy 15 that haven't been graded yet. And so this book, in my definition, is not rare. There's always a copy available for sale. And because of that, there will be ample opportunities to get in on the book. So comics are not rare, but good deals can be, which leads me to tip number 3, which is know when to pounce. And what I mean by this is know when to be decisive, know when to act fast on a comic book deal, because good deals on comics can sometimes be hard to find. Another example of when to pounce is if you collect a certain artist whose exclusives always sell out, like Clayton Crane, for example. If you're a Clayton Crane collector, you damn well better be on his website minutes after he posts a new exclusive, because minutes after that, they're going to be sold out. And minutes after that, they're going to be listed for twice the price on eBay. It just is what it is. So in that situation, you need to be decisive and know when to pounce if you want to get that book at, retail value and not double the secondary aftermarket price. In other situations, there are good deals every single week in this hobby on comic books, namely on auction houses. At auction houses, every single week, there are good deals to be had, with maybe the exception being heritage auctions. I don't know that I've ever seen a crazy good deal on heritage. I'm sure there have been crazy good deals on heritage, but they're far and few in between. But other auction houses, eBay, Comic Link, Comic Connect, there are like outlier lows, which are just phenomenal opportunities to get in on comics. And there's good deals to be had. Consignment pages on Instagram. There are several consignment pages that consistently post good prices on comics. Comics Elite 11, I mean, they have made a name for themselves to post things at reasonable prices so that they sell quick. Other consignment sites, maybe not so much. Like other consignment sites on Instagram, you got to be really careful because they're just way overpriced. And I actually adopt the same pricing strategy on my website, which is to price things at a very fair price all the time. And because of that, the inventory moves incredibly quickly on my website. So if you see a Silver Age or Bronze Age key that you've been hunting for a long time and you see it pop up in the newsletter announcement on my site, chances are it's going to be gone very quickly, because the whole idea behind the pricing strategy is to always post everything at a fair price so that people don't even have to go check the price. The alternative pricing method to this is to price things, and a lot of people do this, at the I don't really want to sell it price. And I will never do that on my website. I'm never going to post a book and say, I really don't want to sell this book, so I'm going to price it $1,000 more than it's worth. And if I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't. To me, what that does is it creates a marketplace for your customers where they never know if it's a good price or not. They don't know if that's a I don't want to sell it price or if that's a fair market value price. And then you create doubt, and then you have people that have to go look up values, and the result is not knowing whether or not something is priced adequately or fairly. On my site, everything is priced at a fair market value, so it moves quickly. So in some situations in this hobby, and tip number 3 is know when to pounce. Tip number 4 is incredibly important if you can accurately grasp the concept here. And tip number 4 is don't hold on to a comic that you overpaid for if there are better opportunities out there. This is a strategy that applies to stocks and other investments as well. If you bought into something, say for example, you bought into a comic book, and we'll have an example here later, for $3,600, and that was the peak price, and you overpaid at that price. Let's say you overpaid for a comic book. Let's say you paid $3,000 and that was the absolute peak price. You overpaid for it, and it's come down like 50 or 60% off of that price since then. First of all, you're in good company. I don't think anybody that's been in this hobby for more than a few years isn't in the same boat as you, myself included, having overpaid for comic books. But if you decide to hold that book, say you paid $3,000, the price came down to $1,500, and you decided, man, I paid $3,000 for this, it's only worth $1,500. I'm just going to hold on to it until that book rebounds to $3,000, at which I'm going to gladly sell it at $3,000 and be done with it. You might end up holding that book for like 10 years, or even worse, it may never get back to that price. And there's nuance to this about which book it is, right? So if the book that you're talking about has really good potential, maybe you're right around the corner from, that character being introduced in the MCU, which, by all accounts in today's market doesn't necessarily mean much as far as value, but The idea is if that character or comic book has potential to go up in value, it may be a good idea to hold on to it. But in most cases, if you overpaid for something, it's halved in price, there are actually better opportunities available that you could take the $1,500 half price, put it in the better opportunity, and get back to the $3,000 quicker. So it's kind of a trap, a mental trap, to get stuck holding that book because you paid $3,000 for it. The price you paid for it has nothing to do with the value or potential of that book. The more important thing than the price you paid is what is the future potential of that book? And are there better opportunities out there? And in most cases, there are better opportunities. So sometimes you got to just cut your losses and sell that book. Don't get stuck holding it for 10 years just to break even when you could have sold it 9 years prior and ended up making some money, by investing in other books or other opportunities. So tip number 4 is don't hold on to something you overpaid for if there's better opportunities available. Tip number 5 is don't impose unnecessary rules on yourself. And I hope that this tip can be liberating to some people, or at least get you to think about the rules that you impose on yourself for collecting. And what I'm talking about here is sometimes people will say, I only collect, off-white to white or white page copy books, or I only collect CGC graded comics, or I only collect whatever it may be. I saw one collector who only collected 5.5 white page copies of Amazing Spider-Man. And this is actually a great example to talk about this imposing unnecessary rules. And we need to preface it by saying, if this rule that you impose on yourself to only collect 5.5 white page copies of something, in your eyes isn't unnecessary, if to you it is amazing and awesome, and the end result is all 5.5 white page copies of something, and you love it, that's the whole point of collecting, is to enjoy it and to love it. So if that is doing it for you, then you can disregard this whole tip. But it gets a little tricky when you start making unwise financial decisions to get to there. It gets a little tricky when you're not enjoying it anymore, where it's becoming more obligatory than rewarding. And I think that a lot of us impose unnecessary rules that become obligatory, that make collecting less fun. So remember, the whole idea is to enjoy this. And if you can loosen up a little bit and loosen up some of these rules and end up enjoying it more, that's the goal. But if it's going to just totally irk you and bug you and you're not going to enjoy the hobby unless you have these rules, then by all means, follow your little rule. So this 5.5 white page copy example was a run of Amazing Spider-Man. It was absolutely awesome to see everything in 5.5 white pages, but I noticed that this collector would buy a higher grade copy, like a 6.5 white page copy, and trade it for a 5.5 white page copy just so that he can have the whole run in 5.5 white. And that's when I start going is that really, a wise way to collect? I mean, and I'm sure that at the end of the day, if you're only collecting 5.5 whites, that means when you see that book that you need as part of your run as 5.5 white, and even though it's 30% over the fair market value, I guarantee you this collector paid 30% over fair market value for a lot of those instances of overpriced buy it now auctions because it just fit that little mold that he needs. So, the problem is at the end of the day, if he decides to move on from this, he has way more into these books to get that 5.5 white than they're actually worth. And, you just have to ask yourself, is this really serving you, or is it actually, shooting you in the foot? So we'll sum it up with the most important tip of all, tip number 6, and then we'll go over some real life examples of books in my personal collection that highlight, examples of the tips that we've talked about in this video. Tip number 6 is collect what you love and you can't go wrong. If you do all of the tips in this video with collecting what you love in mind, you're going to be head and shoulders above other collectors, because if you only collect what you love, even if you make a poor decision, even if you overpay for a book, which we'll talk about here in a couple examples, if you love that character and you love that book, it hurts a little less. If you overpaid for a book because you bought it as an investment or speculation and it completely flopped and you hate the character or you just really don't care for the character, it stings a lot more. So if you just remember and go into this as collecting what you love, you really can't go wrong. So let's flip the camera around and talk about some examples here in my personal collection. We have this book, The Walking Dead #1. This is the black mature readers variant. So underneath the price right there, it says mature readers and it's in black, and that's the more rare version. They ended up stopping the print run and reprinting it with the words mature reader in white. It's the more rare version, the black mature readers variant. And this is a book that I was patient on. When I was in a place in my life where I could afford this book, the price of this book was around $4,000. And I really, really wanted the book. And I could have bought it for $4,000, but I knew that it would probably serve me well if I was just a little bit more patient. And I ended up waiting and getting it for, much less than that, thousands of dollars less than that. It's probably actually come down in price a little bit from what I paid for it. But this is a book that I do absolutely love. It's a book that will stay in my PC forever. I'm a massive Walking Dead fan, and it brings me a tremendous amount of joy to see this in 9.8. So I don't even look at prices anymore. I just smile every single time I see this book. And so in that sense, I don't really care what I paid for it, as long as I didn't pay peak prices. So this book right here, Samurai Santa, is an example of not imposing unnecessary rules on yourself. And in this case, the unnecessary rule would be I only collect CGC graded comics. Don't pass up an opportunity to get in on a rare book or hard to find book if it's graded by a different company. Now, I would recommend that you stick with CGC if you have a choice. If you have a choice between CGC and CBCS, I would stick with CGC. They're more liquid. They have more value than CBCS almost across the board, and we won't get too far into the details of that. I've actually done videos on my channel about, the difference between CBCS and CGC, and there's other videos out there. But the truth remains is that CGC commands a premium over CBCS. But this book in particular came up. It's super hard to find in high grade. This is the first published work by Jim Lee. It's signed by Jim Lee. And I didn't want to pass this opportunity to get this book. If I see this book come up in CGC in a 9.8, I would absolutely love a 9.8 of this book, even if it wasn't signed by Jim Lee. But I'm not going to be so stuck on CGC that I'm going to pass up a good deal on a CBCS graded book. Now this book over here, Strange Tales #4 in a 7.5 in cream to off-white pages. This is one of the earliest published works from John Romita Sr. And it's a book that's incredibly rare. This is one of the top 4 graded examples in the world. It just never comes up for sale, but it has cream to off-white pages. And if I had imposed an unnecessary rule on myself saying that I only collect off-white to white and I don't ever collect cream to off-white pages or cream pages or even slightly brittle pages. Slightly brittle, you get into an area about the longevity of the book, which is kind of a separate conversation. But in some cases, even a slightly brittle or brittle page book should be considered. And one of the main reasons for this is if you zoom out on this wall here of my personal collection, guess what you can't tell on any of these books? The page quality. Not a single one of these books can you tell whether it's white pages or cream pages. So does it really matter? And most of the people, that you're going to share your collection with, if they're not like well-versed comic book people, they're not going to even notice the page quality. They're probably not even going to notice the grade. If they look at this, they're going to say, why does this one say 6 and that one says 9.8? But they're not going to notice the difference. So the point is, if you can live with it, right? If it doesn't irk you to have cream pages, if it doesn't just absolutely destroy your joy of the book, then just loosen up with it and learn to love these collectibles and just enjoy it. If, for example, you can't get past it, then
stick with your rule. It's not unnecessary in that case. But the question is it a necessary rule or is it an unnecessary rule? And if it's unnecessary, don't impose unnecessary rules on yourself.
So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for sticking with me to the end. I sure do appreciate all of you for coming along with me on my collecting journey. And I'm honored and grateful to be a part of your collecting journey by, just subscribing to the channel and supporting my content. Thank you so much. And we'll catch you in the next video. Bye.
Bry's Comics.
Tip number 2, which is comics are not rare. Comics are not rare. Okay, I'm just saying that they're not rare, which means that they are not rare. I mean, there are a few exceptions, but by and large, comics are not rare. And I think if I say it one more time, maybe you'll get the point. Comics are not rare. No, I'm just kidding. Cut that part out, Marcus.